Good evening. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you've made space for rest. Wherever you are right now, let your shoulders drop a little, let your jaw unclench, and give yourself permission to do nothing except listen. In a moment, we'll step into a warm workshop on a winter night, somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, where the only real work is simple, patient, and soothing. If your thoughts drift, that's perfectly fine. You can come back to the sound of the wheel, the soft water, and the steady rhythm of hands shaping clay, and let your mind settle as you go. Outside, winter holds the town in a careful hush. The snow isn't falling anymore, but it looks as if it did not long ago. The world softened at the edges, rooftops rounded, paths pale and muted beneath street lamps. The air has that clean, cold clarity that makes every sound feel distant, as if it has to travel farther than usual. A fence creaks once and then stops. Somewhere a door closes gently, and the quiet resumes, unbroken. A small workshop sits back from the street, its windows dimmed by the evening and lightly fogged with warmth from inside. The glass is filmed with the faintest breath of clay dust, the kind that settles everywhere in a pottery space. On shelves, on the corners of tools, even on the backs of hands, if you don't notice it right away. From the outside, you can see a slow amber glow, a suggestion of motion, and then nothing more. Inside, the workshop feels like a different season entirely. Heat from a little stove has soaked into the wooden workbench and the floorboards, and it's the kind of warmth that doesn't rush at you, it simply holds. The air smells of damp earth, clean water, and something faintly mineral, like rain on stone. There's also a quieter scent beneath that, the dry, powdery note of fired clay from shelves of bisque pieces stacked along the wall, waiting their turn to be glazed. At the center of the room, a pottery wheel waits, stout and patient, its round head clean, but not spotless. A shallow bucket sits beside it, filled with water that has gone a little cloudy from earlier use, the way it always does. On a nearby shelf are sponges worn soft, wooden ribs polished by years of handling, a wire cutter stretched between two small handles, and a needle tool that looks almost too delicate for the work it does. Everything has a place, and everything is used often enough to feel familiar. The person in the workshop moves without hurry, as if the evening has no deadline. Their name is Rowan, an apprentice who has learned to keep the mind quiet while the hands stay awake. Rowan's hair is tucked back, sleeves rolled to mid-forearm, and the skin of their hands already carries a faint gray tint from clay, like a memory that doesn't wash away completely. Their expression is calm and focused, not stern, more like someone listening for something gentle and steady. The workshop is not silent, but its sounds are simple. The stove ticks softly as it warms and cools, a subtle metallic settling. Now and then, the building gives a quiet creak, as if it's stretching its joints against the cold outside. The light hum of a refrigerator-sized dehumidifier comes and goes, cycling as it keeps the air from turning too damp. And under it all is the softest of rhythms. The wheel's motor, when it's on, a low purr that feels more like a breath than a machine. Rowan begins with preparation, because in pottery, the beginning is always in the beginning. On a plaster bat set on the workbench lies a wedge of clay wrapped earlier in plastic to keep it from drying. Rowan peels the plastic back with slow fingers and folds it neatly aside, as if even the plastic deserves to be handled gently. The clay itself is cool to the touch, smooth in some places, and slightly ridged in others where it was cut and pressed. It has a quiet weight, dense and promising. The first contact with clay is always an agreement. It will respond, but only if you speak to it in its own language. Rowan presses thumbs into the wedge and feels for consistency. No hidden air pockets, no hard lumps, no overly wet seams. The clay yields with a muted resistance, the way firm dough yields, but colder, more grounded. A faint, earthy scent rises as the surface opens, and it's strangely comforting, like the smell of a garden path after snow melts. Rowan begins wedging, the motion steady and unshowy. Push forward with the heel of the hand, fold back, turn, push, fold, turn. Each repetition smooths the clay's internal structure, aligning it, waking it up. The sound is quiet, a soft thump as clay meets plaster, a faint whisper as palms slide. Even the pressure is measured, not aggressive, just enough to persuade the clay into readiness, like smoothing wrinkles from a blanket. As Rowan works, the mind stays level, not empty exactly, but uncluttered. Thoughts drift by like the snowy street outside the window, pale, slow, and unimportant. The only thing that matters is texture pressure and rhythm. The clay becomes more unified under the hands, its surface taking on a slight sheen from warmth and friction. Rowan pauses once, palms resting on the wedge, and notices how the clay holds the heat of the skin for a moment before returning to its own cool center. When the clay feels right, elastic, even responsive, Rowan uses a wire cutter to slice a portion free. The wire sings faintly as it moves through, a soft, taut sound, and the cut face reveals the clay's smooth interior, a gentle spiral from the wedging motion. Rowan sets the rest aside and cups the working piece between both hands, compressing it into a rounded mound. The shape doesn't need to be perfect, only coherent, as if it already knows it will become one thing. Rowan carries the clay to the wheel and presses it down onto the center of the wheel head with a firm, confident pat. The contact is solid, a dull thud that travels up through the arms. For a moment, Rowan tests it, trying to twist the mound slightly to ensure it grips. It holds, anchored by pressure, and the faint tackiness of damp clay on metal. Rowan's fingers trace the edge once, checking that it's secure, then reaches for the water bucket. The first wetting is light. Rowan dips fingertips into the cloudy water, lifts them, and lets a thin film coat the hands. Water glints in the warm light and gathers at the knuckles before sliding down toward the wrists. A few drops fall onto the wheel head, where they bead and then smear. The clay darkens slightly where it's touched, deepening in color, becoming more like river stone than dust. Rowan turns the wheel on with a foot pedal. The wheel responds instantly, a low hum rising into a steady purr as the head begins to spin. At slow speed, it's almost meditative to watch. The clay rotating, the wet sheen catching the lamp, the world narrowing to a circle. Rowan places both hands around the mound, elbows braced lightly against the thighs for stability, and begins the gentle work of centering. Centering is not force. Rowan has learned it is conversation. The clay will wobble if you fight it. It will settle if you guide it. Rowan increases the speed a little and presses inward with the left hand, while the right hand supports and steadies, palms forming a firm but kind boundary. The clay pushes back, and the sensation is vivid, pressure meeting pressure. The clay's cool mass sliding under slick water. The wheel's rhythm threads through everything, constant and reassuring. The wobble diminishes, then returns, then diminishes again, as if the clay is deciding whether to trust. Rowan's fingers adjust by a fraction, a small change in angle, and the clay responds, smoothing into a more stable rotation. The sound of the wheel stays even, but the sound of contact changes. Less irregular slapping, more consistent shushing, like a soft brush moving over fabric. Rowan breathes slowly and keeps the shoulders relaxed, letting the body become a steady frame. Rowan cones the clay up, hands braced and moving with controlled pressure, guiding the mass upward into a tall, spinning hill. The clay rises smoothly, a damp pillar for a moment, and then Rowan brings it down again, compressing it back into a squat mound. Up, then down. Each cycle tightens the clay's structure and strengthens the center. Water makes the surface glossy, and the slip, the thin, creamy layer of clay and water, coats Rowan's palms like cool lotion. On the final pass, Rowan settles the mound into a centered dome. The top is slightly rounded, edges neat, and the rotation now looks almost still because it's so true. That illusion spinning that appears motionless is always satisfying, as if the wheel has found balance, not just in clay, but in the room itself. Rowan slows the wheel slightly and places both thumbs at the top center, feeling for the exact middle point without looking too hard, trusting touch. Opening the clay begins with a gentle downward pressure. Rowan's thumbs press into the center, supported by the other fingers, and the clay yields, slowly at first, and then more willingly. The sensation is intimate and steady. The clay's coolness, the resistance giving way, the way the walls thicken around the thumbs. Slip gathers, slicking the movement, and Rowan keeps the thumbs aligned so the opening stays centered. Rowan stops at a careful depth, leaving enough clay at the bottom to form a sturdy base. The wheel turns at a moderate pace now, not fast, not slow, just enough to keep the clay responsive. Rowan dips fingers in water again and lets a small stream run across the surface, washing away excess slip. The water makes a soft patter as it hits the spinning clay and flings outward in tiny droplets, darkening the wheel head in a ring. Next comes widening the opening. Rowan places fingertips inside the hole and the other hand outside, pinching lightly and drawing the clay outward, coaxing it into a broader circle. The clay moves like something alive, but calm, responding to small changes in pressure. Each adjustment feels like guiding a slow dance. Inside hand lifts a fraction, outside hand supports, and the clay spreads evenly, forming the beginning of a bowl's interior. The workshop sounds become more noticeable in the spaces between movements. The wheel's motor is a constant, low note. The water bucket gives a small clink when Rowan's knuckles brush its rim. A sponge makes a faint squeak when squeezed, releasing a gentle trickle. Outside, winter remains quiet, and that quiet feels like insulation around the room, as if the world has agreed to keep still while this small circle turns. Rowan begins pulling the walls up. Fingers inside, one hand outside, pressure applied gently at the base, then lifted upward in a smooth, continuous motion. The clay rises under the hands, thinning and lengthening, becoming a wall that can hold shape. Rowan repeats the pull, each time refining. A little more height, a little more evenness, a little more grace. Slip coats the fingertips, and the feeling is both slippery and precise, like handling a bar of soap without dropping it. With each pull, Rowan pauses for a breath, not because of strain, but because pause is part of control. The wheel continues to spin, and the clay continues to be round, but Rowan's attention stays on the smallest signals. A slight thick spot, a barely perceptible wobble, the way the rim feels when it begins to flutter. Rowan responds with small corrections, smoothing with the side of a finger, supporting with the heel of the palm, adding a touch more water only when needed. Now the form is clearly a bowl in progress, open, gently rising, with walls that curve outward. Rowan slows the wheel a little and compresses the rim, an important step that keeps it strong. 2 fingertips pinch lightly at the edge, not to narrow it, but to firm it, aligning the particles and preventing cracks. The rim feels cool and delicate, and Rowan's touch is careful, as if petting a small animal that might startle. Rowan shapes the curve. The inside hand presses outward, the outside hand supports and guides upward. The clay responds by rounding, the wall moving from vertical to a soft, generous arc. A bowl does not demand sharp corners. It prefers continuity, a line that the eye and the hand can follow without interruption. Rowan watches the profile as it spins, noticing how the curve catches light, how the surface reflects the lamp in a moving ribbon. A little too much water can make clay collapse, and Rowan is mindful of that. Instead of flooding the surface, Rowan uses a sponge damp, not dripping, and runs it along the inside, letting it collect excess slip. The sponge glides with a muted whisper, and when Rowan squeezes it over the bucket, the water falls in a soft stream, thicker than plain water, carrying clay back into the cloudy mix. The bucket accepts it with a gentle, liquid sound. Rowan reaches for a wooden rib and holds it against the outside of the bowl, letting the spinning clay smooth itself against the tool. The rib's edge is worn silky from years of use, and it makes the surface feel more finished with each pass. Rowan keeps the pressure light, enough to refine, but not enough to distort. The sound changes again, less wet shush, more subtle scrape, like a pencil moving over heavy paper. The bowl's walls are now even, and the rim feels consistent all the way around. Rowan pauses the wheel briefly and runs a fingertip along the lip, checking thickness by feel. The clay is cool, and the rim leaves a faint smear on the skin, a gray trace that will dry pale. Rowan turns the wheel on again and uses a needle tool to define the base line, just a shallow groove near the foot, a visual and structural cue that helps the bowl feel intentional. In the warmth of the room, slip begins to dry on Rowan's hands. It tightens slightly, turning from slick to powdery at the edges of the knuckles. Rowan rinses in the bucket again, rubbing fingers together under the water, and watches the cloudiness swirl like fog in miniature. When Rowan lifts the hands out, droplets cling to the fingertips and then fall in slow, steady taps onto the wheel head, keeping time with nothing in particular. Rowan decides the bowl wants one last refinement, a softer belly, a slightly more open mouth. The wheel slows to a pace where the hands can make nuanced changes. Rowan supports the rim with one hand and uses the other to press gently from inside, encouraging the curve outward by a few millimeters. It doesn't look like much in a single moment, but the difference accumulates, and the bowl becomes more inviting, as if it's making room for soup, for tea, for the warmth of being held. The outside air presses at the windows, and the glass has fogged more now. In the corner, the stove gives a quiet tick, and Rowan hears it with the same attention as the wheel, everything in the room part of one small, steady orchestra. The lamp casts soft shadows across shelves of mugs and cups waiting to be trimmed. Some pieces are covered loosely with plastic, their shapes resting in darkness like sleeping animals. Rowan smooths the interior with a final pass of the sponge. The water spreads in a thin film, and the clay beneath looks satiny. The small ridges from fingers softened into a calm surface. The sensation through the sponge is distinct. The clay's slight drag, the way it yields just enough to be smoothed, but holds firm enough to stay. Rowan's breathing matches the wheel, even and unforced. Now comes a quiet finishing moment, compressing the base from inside. Rowan's fingertips press down and outward at the bottom of the bowl, firming the clay where it will bear weight. This small action matters later, when the piece dries and shrinks, when the kiln's heat tests every weak point. Rowan does it patiently, not thinking about the kiln, not thinking about later, simply making the base strong because that is what the hands know to do. Rowan cleans the rim with care, pinching lightly and then smoothing with a damp fingertip. The rim becomes rounded and comfortable, the kind of edge you wouldn't hesitate to drink from. The clay leaves cool residue under the fingernails, and Rowan doesn't mind. It feels like proof of time spent making something simple and useful. The wheel keeps turning, and the bowl looks almost still, a quiet illusion of motionlessness in a moving world. When the shape feels complete, Rowan slows the wheel until it nearly stops. The bowl sits centered, glossy with moisture, its curve gentle and balanced. Rowan takes the wire cutter and with steady hands draws it under the bowl to separate it from the wheel head. The wire makes a faint, satisfying hiss against metal, and the bowl shifts almost imperceptibly, now free but still in place, held by friction and the slight suction of damp clay. Rowan slides a thin wooden bat under the base, lifting carefully. The bowl comes up smoothly, and for a moment Rowan holds it close, not to admire it in a proud way, but to feel its weight and presence. It is cool and soft, fragile in this stage, and it seems to carry the calm of the room in its curved walls. Rowan sets it on a shelf where other newly thrown pieces rest, covered with plastic that drapes like a quiet blanket. With the wheel off, the workshop grows even quieter. The hum disappears, leaving only the stove's occasional tick and the soft hush of the room's warm air moving. Rowan washes hands in the bucket, and then at a small sink, letting warm water run over wrists and palms. Clay swirls down the drain trap slowly, and Rowan wipes the sink afterward with a sponge, mindful of keeping pipes clear. Another small practice of care. Rowan returns to the wheel and wipes the wheel head clean, gathering slip with a rib and a sponge. The movement is gentle, repetitive, and calming in a different way now that the throwing is done. The wheel, damp and clean, looks ready for another piece, but Rowan doesn't rush to start. One bowl is enough for tonight. Winter evenings are long, and rest is part of the craft too. Rowan tidies tools and sets them back in their places. Rib on the shelf, needle tool in its cup, wire cutter hung neatly to dry. Each object makes a small sound as it lands, soft wood on wood, metal against ceramic, sponge placed with a quiet squish. These sounds are modest, but they feel meaningful, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The workshop appreciates being put in order, and Rowan does too. Near the window, Rowan pauses and looks out. The street lamp casts a pale circle on the snow, and the light makes the world look gentle rather than cold. No cars pass. No voices carry. It's as if the entire outside world has wrapped itself in a thick scarf. Rowan watches for a moment, then turns back toward the warmth, letting the quiet outside remain outside. Rowan sits on a stool near the stove, hands wrapped around a mug not clay-fired yet. Just an old, sturdy cup that has survived years of use. The drink inside is simple and warm. Rowan doesn't think about perfection or the pieces that cracked last month or the glaze tests that didn't go as planned. Tonight has been about touch and rhythm, about steady pressure and water, about the wheel's soft breath, and the clay's willingness to become something. In the mind, the steps replay without urgency. Wedge, press, center open, pull, shape smooth, compress, release. Each step is a small reassurance that calm can be made, one action at a time. Rowan flexes fingers and feels the faint dryness where clay has been washed away. The skin feels slightly tighter, a little tender, but also clean in a satisfying way, as if the hands have done what they were made to do. The lamp's light seems warmer now, or perhaps the night has deepened, and made the contrast stronger. Shadows on the shelves look soft, rounded. The covered bowls and cups rest quietly, their forms held in damp darkness, waiting for the slow transformation of drying. Rowan knows that by morning the surfaces will be firmer, the sheen gone, the clay turning from deep gray to a lighter, chalkier tone. Outside, winter continues to keep watch, but the workshop is a small island of warmth. The stove hums faintly. The air smells clean and earthy. Rowan's breathing stays slow, and the body feels pleasantly heavy, the kind of heaviness that comes after focused work rather than worry. Nothing needs to be solved tonight. The bowl is made, and that is enough. If you were there, you might notice how the quiet is not empty at all. It's full of gentle details, the memory of the wheel's purr still lingering in the ears, the sensation of clay's cool slip on the fingertips, the soft drag of sponge across a spinning surface, the steady, unhurried patience that the craft requires and rewards. In a world that often asks for speed, the wheel asks only for steadiness. Rowan stands at last and turns off the lamp near the bench, leaving just a smaller light by the stove. The room becomes dim, cozy, and still. Tools rest in their places. Bowls rest under plastic. The wheel rests, quiet and clean, its round head catching a faint glimmer. Rowan takes one final look around, as if to say goodnight to the space itself, and then steps toward the door. When the door opens, a breath of cold air slips in, fresh and sharp. It doesn't invade. It simply reminds the room that winter is real and waiting. Rowan steps out, closes the door gently, and the workshop's warmth stays inside, saved for another evening. The snow outside holds the sound of footsteps softly, and the night welcomes them without interruption. And as the street returns to stillness, you can keep the workshop in your mind as long as you want. The amber light, the steady wheel, the cool clay turning under warm hands, the simple rhythm that asks nothing from you except to follow it. Let that rhythm slow your thoughts. Let it smooth the edges of the day. And when you're ready, let yourself drift as quietly as snow settling into sleep.